In the shadow of ancient fortresses and behind gilded palazzo doors, Italy birthed more than the world's most feared crime syndicates. It forged its most dangerous secret weapon. Before we go deep into the story, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hi! Subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy this story, because tomorrow I have another beautiful story to share with you, and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Now, let's go into the story. From the blood-soaked hills of Sicily to the labyrinthine streets of Naples, from the mountain strongholds of Calabria to the marble corridors of Rome, the Italian Mafia has reigned for over a century as the epitome of organized crime. Names like Luciano, Rina, and Corleone have become synonymous with terror and power, their legacies written in blood and fear across generations. Yet while these infamous godfathers commanded headlines and inspired legends, an invisible monarchy was rising in the shadows. Behind every man of honor stood women, not as mere companions or silent supporters, but as architects of empires, executioners of vengeance, and masters of strategy who turned grief into power and exclusion into dominance. These women didn't just inherit thrones left vacant by murdered husbands or imprisoned brothers. They seized control with calculated ferocity, proving that in the ruthless arithmetic of organized crime, a godmother's wrath could eclipse even the most legendary godfather's reign. Picture a woman in austere black standing before a medieval fortress, pearl rosary wrapped around her fingers, armed men flanking her like chess pieces awaiting her command. This is no widow seeking protection. This is the queen who gives the orders, the strategist who decides who lives and who disappears, the matriarch whose word is absolute law. In this gripping exploration, we unveil the classified histories of 10 extraordinary Italian mafia queens who didn't just shape the underworld, they ruled it. From beauty queens turned assassins to strategic masterminds who managed billion-dollar criminal networks from prison cells, these women rewrote the rules of La Cosa Nostra, the Camorra, and the 'Ndrangheta. You'll witness their shocking transformations, from mourning widows to merciless bosses, from overlooked daughters to clan commanders, from society's margins to the absolute center of power. Their stories span decades of vendettas, alliances, betrayals, and a ruthless commitment to family, a code that would simultaneously elevate them to untouchable status and ultimately seal their fates behind prison walls. These are the godmothers history tried to erase, the queens the mafia never wanted you to know existed. But their legacy of blood, brilliance, and brutal ambition cannot be silenced. Let us begin with the inheritor, a woman born into the shadow of a legendary dawn, who would prove that power recognizes no gender when survival demands a queen's touch. The inheritor. Maria Licciardi was born into royalty, not the kind recognized by courts and crowns, but the far more dangerous nobility of Naples' criminal underworld. Born on March 24, 1951, in the Secondigliano district, a concrete maze where loyalty meant survival and betrayal meant death, she grew up breathing the rarefied air of Camorra aristocracy. Her brother, Gennaro Licciardi, known throughout Naples as Asigna, the monkey, ruled the Licciardi clan with an iron fist that crushed rivals and inspired terror across the region. Maria learned her craft in the family dining room where strategy sessions unfolded between courses of pasta and wine, where coded conversations about business meant life and death decisions, where she observed her brother transform from flesh and blood into legend. She understood instinctively what many men in the organization failed to grasp. Power wasn't about who shouted loudest or pulled the trigger fastest. Power belonged to the one who saw 3 moves ahead, who knew when to forge alliances and when to eliminate threats, who could command absolute loyalty through calculated respect rather than impulsive violence. When Gennaro died in prison in 1994, the Licciardi clan faced a crisis that had destroyed lesser families. The vacuum left by a powerful boss typically triggered internal warfare, with ambitious lieutenants tearing apart the organization in their scramble for control. But Maria had been preparing for this moment her entire life, watching from the shadows, learning every weakness in every rival clan, memorizing every debt owed and every slight that required vengeance. She didn't ask for permission. She took her seat at the head of the table and dared anyone to question her right to it. Those who doubted her competence learned quickly, some through persuasion, others through disappearance. Maria understood that a woman leading the Camorra needed to be twice as strategic, 3 times as ruthless, and absolutely unshakable in her authority. She couldn't afford the luxury of mercy or the weakness of hesitation. Her masterstroke came in forming the Secondigliano Alliance, a coalition of Camorra clans that revolutionized organized crime in Naples. Where her brother had ruled through force, Maria ruled through strategic genius, convincing rival families that cooperation would make them all wealthier and more powerful than endless bloodshed ever could. She orchestrated this unprecedented alliance while maintaining such a low profile that law enforcement barely knew her name, the ultimate proof of her skill. In the shadows, she controlled drug trafficking networks worth billions, oversaw extortion operations across entire neighborhoods, and managed money laundering schemes that moved fortunes through legitimate businesses. For years, Maria Licciardi remained Naples' invisible empress, the godmother whose word was law but whose face remained unknown to most of the city she controlled. She evaded capture through meticulous caution and strategic brilliance, always staying one step ahead of investigators who couldn't believe a woman could command such power. Her reign finally ended in 2001 when police arrested her during a massive anti-Camorra operation. Even in custody, she maintained her dignified silence, revealing nothing, protecting her organization to the end. She served 8 years before her release in 2009, but the streets hadn't forgotten who she was. In 2021, authorities arrested her again in another sweeping crackdown, proving that Maria Licciardi's influence persisted across decades, transcending prison walls and defying every attempt to erase her legacy. She had inherited a crown and transformed it into an empire, proving that in the brutal hierarchy of organized crime, the most dangerous ruler might be the one history least expected to reign. The Widow's Revenge. On a spring morning in 1955, Assunta Maresca, known to all of Naples as Puppetta, the little doll, stood before a mirror in her wedding dress, a vision of beauty that had won her the title of Miss Roano just months earlier. At 20 years old, with delicate features and an enchanting smile, she embodied every romantic notion of Italian femininity. By summer's end, that same woman would gun down a man in broad daylight on a crowded Naples street, transforming from beauty queen to avenging angel in the span of a single, devastating tragedy. Puppetta had married Pasquale Simonetti, a rising Camorra boss known as Pascal Nola, in a union that merged love with criminal dynasty. She was young, pregnant, and deeply in love, qualities that made her seem untouchable by the violence that defined her husband's world. But the Camorra respects neither youth nor pregnancy nor love. Within months of their marriage, rival factions within the organization decided Pascal had become too powerful, too ambitious, too dangerous to their own interests. They shot him down like a dog in the street. When news reached Puppetta, she was 5 months pregnant with their child, carrying new life even as her husband's blood soaked into Naples' cobblestones. In that moment, something fundamental shifted in her soul. The grief that might have broken another woman instead forged her into something harder, colder, infinitely more dangerous. She didn't retreat into mourning. She didn't seek protection from male relatives. She didn't play the role of the helpless widow that Camorra tradition expected. Instead, Puppetta Maresca picked up a gun. She identified Antonio Esposito as the man responsible for ordering her husband's assassination, and on a busy Naples street, with witnesses watching in stunned disbelief, she walked up to him and emptied her weapon into his body. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She stood over his corpse and declared to anyone within earshot that she had avenged her husband's murder, that justice had been served by her hand, that the blood debt had been paid in full. The audacity of her act sent shockwaves through the Camorra. Women didn't do this. Women didn't publicly execute made men. Women certainly didn't claim vengeance as their personal right. But Puppetta had rewritten the rules through sheer force of will and the undeniable righteousness of her fury. When police arrested her, she showed no remorse, only satisfaction. She had done what honor demanded, what love required, what the code of vendetta made inevitable. The courts sentenced her to 18 years in prison, but she served only 10 before gaining release in 1965. Yet her transformation wasn't complete. Upon release, Pappetta married Umberto Amaturo, another Camorra boss, diving deeper into the underworld rather than escaping it. Her second marriage proved troubled, marked by his infidelities and her growing involvement in the family's criminal operations, drug trafficking, money laundering, territory disputes that required strategic thinking and ruthless execution. Pappetta Maresca's story became legend, inspiring films, books, and countless retellings across generations. She proved that a widow's grief could be weaponized, that personal loss could fuel the rise of a criminal empress, that the most dangerous enemy might be the woman everyone had dismissed as merely decorative. Her act of revenge on that Naples street wasn't an ending but a beginning, the birth of a godmother who would haunt the Italian underworld for decades. A beautiful killer whose delicate features masked a will of tempered steel and a heart that had learned to beat in rhythm with Vendetta's ancient song. The Shadow Operator. While some women seized power through spectacular acts of violence that dominated headlines and shocked the public, Rosetta Cutolo understood that true power whispered rather than shouted, operated in shadows rather than spotlights, and wielded influence through invisibility rather than notoriety. Born in 1937 in Ottaviano near Naples, she grew up in a family where criminal enterprise was simply business, where loyalty meant everything, and where her brother Raphael would become one of the most powerful and notorious Camorra bosses in Italian history. Raphael Cutolo, the charismatic and ruthless leader of the Nuova Camorra Organizzata, dreamed of uniting Naples' fractured criminal clans under centralized leadership, a vision that required not just muscle and intimidation, but sophisticated organization, financial acumen, and strategic coordination that few possessed. While Raphael became the public face of the organization, the magnetic personality who inspired devotion and terror in equal measure, it was Rosetta who ensured the empire actually functioned. She became La Padrona, the mistress, not through marriage but through indispensability. While her brother conducted his wars and made his grand pronouncements, Rosetta managed the mundane yet critical operations that kept money flowing, alliances stable, and the organization running with clockwork precision. She oversaw financial matters with an accountant's attention to detail, coordinated drug trafficking operations that moved narcotics worth millions through Naples and beyond, and maintained relationships with other criminal organizations through careful diplomacy and strategic favors. Law enforcement barely knew her name. Newspapers never printed her photograph. The public remained unaware that behind every major decision Raphael made, Rosetta had already analyzed the options, calculated the risks, and prepared contingency plans. She preferred it this way. Anonymity was armor. The less visible she remained, the more freely she could operate, the more devastating her effectiveness became. Her genius lay in understanding that criminal empires collapsed not from external pressure, but from internal chaos, poor financial management, broken alliances, impulsive decisions made in anger rather than calculation. She brought order to an inherently chaotic world, transforming her brother's raw ambition into sustainable power. She tracked debts owed and debts collected, knew which politicians could be bought and which judges could be threatened, understood which rival families might be turned into allies and which required elimination. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, as the Nuova Camorra Organizzata reached its zenith of power and influence, Rosetta remained the invisible architect, the strategic mind that anticipated problems before they materialized and solved them before they threatened the organization. She never craved recognition or fame. She craved control, efficiency, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that empires rose or fell based on her decisions. But even the most careful operator cannot remain invisible forever. As Italian law enforcement intensified efforts to dismantle the Camorra in the 1990s, investigators eventually identified Rosetta's crucial role. They arrested her in 1993, charging her with crimes related to her extensive involvement in the organization's operations. Her conviction proved what authorities had suspected but struggled to document, that the most dangerous member of a criminal enterprise might be the one whose name rarely appeared in police reports, whose face remained unknown to the public, whose power derived not from spectacle but from surgical precision in managing the machinery of organized crime. Rosetta Cutolo had perfected the art of the shadow, proving that in the mafia's brutal hierarchy, the hand that holds the ledger can be just as deadly as the hand that holds the gun. The rule breaker. In the mountain strongholds of Calabria, where the 'Ndrangheta has ruled for over a century with codes more ancient and unforgiving than any other Italian crime syndicate, the very notion of a female boss was not just unlikely. It was considered impossible. The 'Ndrangheta, perhaps the most traditional and patriarchal of Italy's mafia organizations, held sacred the belief that women existed to support, to bear children, to maintain households, but never under any circumstances to command. Yet Nella Serpa, known throughout Calabria as La Bionda for her blonde hair, would shatter this iron rule through sheer force of will and an appetite for vengeance that terrified even the most hardened criminals. Born into the Serpa clan in Plati, a small mountain town that served as a 'Ndrangheta stronghold, Nella understood from childhood that her world operated by different laws than the rest of Italy. Blood ties meant everything. Family honor superseded individual life. Betrayal warranted death, and weakness invited annihilation. She grew up watching her brothers and male cousins groomed for leadership, while she was expected to marry well and produce the next generation of soldiers for the family enterprise. But in 2012, everything changed. Her brother Pietro Serpa was murdered, gunned down by rivals in a dispute that threatened to tear the clan apart and leave their territory vulnerable to hostile takeover. The traditional response would have been for surviving male relatives to assume control and orchestrate revenge. Instead, Nella stepped forward with a clarity of purpose that stunned the organization. She didn't ask for permission or wait for consensus. She declared herself the acting boss and vowed immediate, brutal vengeance against those responsible for her brother's death. What followed shocked even the 'Ndrangheta's most violent elements. Nella orchestrated not one but 2 murders in swift succession, personally overseeing the executions with a cold efficiency that left no doubt about her capability or her willingness to do whatever power required. She didn't delegate violence, she embraced it. She didn't hide behind male proxies, she commanded directly. The men who had doubted her fell silent, then fell in line, recognizing that this woman possessed something far more dangerous than brute strength, absolute conviction and zero hesitation. Her rise represented a seismic shift in the 'Ndrangheta's centuries-old power structure. The organization's governing body, traditionally composed entirely of men, was forced to acknowledge Nella Serpa as a legitimate boss, the first woman in the syndicate's history to achieve such recognition. It wasn't because they believed in gender equality or progressive values. It was because she had proven, through action rather than words, that she could command territory, eliminate enemies, and maintain the clan's operations with ruthless competence that matched any male leader. Under Nella's leadership, the Serpa clan didn't just survive, it thrived. She oversaw extensive criminal operations including extortion, drug trafficking, and contract killings throughout Calabria. Her reputation for steely determination and strategic brilliance made her both feared and respected. She demonstrated that leadership in the 'Ndrangheta required not physical strength, but mental fortitude, not masculine posturing, but intelligent calculation, not tradition, but adaptation to changing circumstances. Law enforcement eventually closed in on her reign. In 2014, authorities arrested Nella Serpa and charged her with mafia activities, drug trafficking, and multiple murders. The courts sentenced her to life imprisonment, but even from behind bars, she continued attempting to control her family's affairs, using coded messages hidden in everyday items to bypass prison restrictions and maintain her influence. Nella Serpa had broken the ultimate rule in organized crime's most traditional institution, proving that when power demands a leader, Gender becomes irrelevant compared to capability, courage, and the willingness to write new rules in blood. The strategic mind. In the chaotic landscape of Naples' criminal underworld, where short-sighted bosses measured power in bodies dropped and territories seized through brute force, Anna Mazza, otherwise known as the Black Widow, understood a more sophisticated truth. Sustainable empires are built not through endless warfare, but through strategic alliances, calculated compromises, and the kind of long-term thinking that transforms temporary dominance into generational dynasty. Born in 1938 in Quindasai, a small town in the Avellino province, she married into the Camorra when she wed Gennaro Mocha, a powerful boss whose ambitions matched her own capacity for strategic brilliance. Anna didn't enter the criminal world as a naive bride expecting domestic tranquility. She studied her husband's operations with the analytical precision of a military strategist, recognizing patterns others missed, identifying weaknesses in rival organizations, and understanding that the Camorra's greatest vulnerability wasn't law enforcement or rival families, it was its own self-destructive tendency toward internal conflict and fragmented power structures that wasted resources on pointless vendettas. When Gennaro died in the late 1970s, leaving a power vacuum that typically triggered violent succession battles, Anna refused to allow chaos to consume what they had built. She assumed control of the Mocha clan with a clear vision: expansion through consolidation, power through coalition, influence through intelligence rather than mere intimidation. While other bosses waged bloody wars over street corners and neighborhood territories, Anna was playing a much larger game. She transformed the Mocha clan from a regional operation into one of the most influential factions within the Camorra by doing what few male bosses had the patience or foresight to attempt. She built bridges instead of burning them. Anna forged strategic alliances with other Camorra families, negotiating agreements that allowed multiple clans to profit simultaneously from drug trafficking networks, extortion schemes, and money laundering operations. She understood that a smaller share of a thriving, stable enterprise was worth far more than total control of a territory torn apart by constant warfare. Her genius lay in recognizing that every clan leader wanted the same things: wealth, territory, respect, and security for their families. Rather than treating these as zero-sum competitions where one clan's gain required another's loss, Anna created frameworks for mutual benefit. She brokered truces between longtime enemies, negotiated territory divisions that satisfied competing interests, and established protocols for resolving disputes without resorting to assassinations that would inevitably trigger cycles of revenge. Under Anna's leadership, the Mocha clan's influence expanded throughout Naples and beyond. She oversaw vast criminal enterprises with the organizational sophistication of a legitimate corporation, maintaining detailed financial records, establishing clear chains of command, and ensuring that operations ran smoothly even when key figures were imprisoned or killed. Her strategic mind anticipated law enforcement tactics, planned for contingencies, and always maintained multiple backup options. But even the most brilliant strategist cannot operate indefinitely in the criminal underworld without attracting attention. In the early 1990s, as Italian authorities intensified their war against the Camorra, Anna Mazza was arrested and charged with murder, extortion, and mafia association. The evidence against her revealed the vast scope of her operations and the sophisticated networks she had constructed over decades. Her arrest was a significant blow to the Mocha clan, yet it also served as the ultimate testament to her strategic genius. The alliances she had forged, the systems she had established, and the organizational structures she had built proved resilient enough to survive even her absence. Anna Mazza had proven that in the brutal arithmetic of organized crime, the most dangerous weapon might not be a gun, but a mind capable of transforming enemies into allies and chaos into calculated empire. The beautiful killer. Raffaella Del Tirio entered rooms like a work of art, impossibly elegant, devastatingly beautiful, with the kind of presence that made men forget themselves and underestimate everything except her appearance. They called her La Giona, the big female kitten, a nickname that captured both her feline grace and the dangerous assumption that she was merely decorative, merely feminine. merely someone's wife rather than a force capable of tearing apart anyone foolish enough to mistake beauty for weakness. Born into the violent world of the Camorra in Naples' Campania region, Raffaella understood from an early age that femininity could be weaponized, that expectations could be subverted, and that the most lethal predator is often the one prey never sees coming. Her marriage to Nicola Pianese, a significant Camorra boss, initially seemed to confirm traditional roles, the beautiful woman standing beside the powerful man, enhancing his status through her elegance while he handled the brutal business of organized crime. But Raffaella was studying, learning, absorbing every detail of operations, alliances, and the delicate balance of power that kept their criminal empire functioning. She wasn't content to be ornamental. She was preparing to be essential. In 2006, everything changed in the span of a single gunshot. Nicola Pianese was assassinated in a brutal mafia hit, gunned down by rivals who assumed his death would create chaos, fragment the Pianese clan, and open territory for conquest by more aggressive families. They calculated the organization's strength based on the men they could see, never considering that the most dangerous member of the Pianese clan wore designer clothes and pearl earrings. Raffaella's response to widowhood shocked even hardened Camorra veterans. She didn't retreat into mourning or seek protection from male relatives. She didn't allow the clan to fracture or territory to be ceded. Instead, with remarkable tenacity and strategic acumen that belied every stereotype about grieving widows, she stepped into her husband's role and declared herself boss of the Pianese d'Alterio clan. Her beauty, which had once seemed her most notable attribute, became psychological warfare. Men struggled to reconcile her elegant appearance with the ruthless commands she issued, the violence she authorized, the absolute authority she wielded. Under Raffaella's command, the clan didn't just survive, it thrived and expanded. She oversaw extensive criminal enterprises, including drug trafficking networks that moved narcotics worth millions through Naples and beyond, extortion operations that controlled entire neighborhoods, and arms smuggling that supplied weapons to various criminal organizations. Her leadership style combined feminine intuition with masculine ruthlessness, creating an unpredictable and therefore more dangerous approach that kept rivals off balance. She understood that her appearance was both advantage and vulnerability. Men underestimated her, which gave her tactical superiority in negotiations and conflicts. But she also faced constant challenges to her authority from those who couldn't accept that a woman, especially one who looked like her, could command a major Camorra faction. Raffaella met every challenge with decisive action, demonstrating through eliminations and strategic victories that beauty and brutality were not contradictions, but complementary weapons in her arsenal. Her reign continued successfully until 2012, when law enforcement finally closed in during a massive police operation targeting the Camorra. The raid was spectacular. Authorities confiscated luxury cars, multiple properties, and vast sums of money, revealing the enormous wealth and influence Raffaella had accumulated. Her arrest made international headlines, not because a Camorra boss had been captured, but because the world struggled to reconcile the elegant woman in photographs with the ruthless criminal mastermind described in indictments. Raffaella d'Alterio had proven that femininity and lethality were not opposites, but variations of power, that beauty could mask brutality, and that the most dangerous killer might be the one who looked least capable of violence. A lesson written in blood across Naples streets by a woman they called the Big Kitten, who turned out to be a lioness. The Empire Builder. Maria Angela di Trapani was born into mafia royalty, the daughter of Don Ciccio di Trapani, a significant figure whose name carried weight throughout Sicily's criminal underworld. But unlike those who merely inherited power and maintained what previous generations had built, Maria Angela possessed an ambition that transcended preservation. She envisioned expansion, diversification, and the transformation of a regional operation into a sophisticated criminal enterprise that would rival the most powerful clans in Cosa Nostra history. Her marriage to Salvatore Madonia, a high-ranking member of the Palermo Mafia clan, gave her both legitimacy and opportunity. positioning her at the intersection of two powerful families with the strategic vision to leverage both into something unprecedented. The early years of her involvement seemed traditionally supportive, the boss's wife who understood the business, managed household affairs, and maintained appropriate discretion about family operations. But Maria Angela was studying the entire ecosystem of Sicilian organized crime with the analytical precision of a corporate strategist, identifying gaps in markets, weaknesses in rival organizations, and opportunities for expansion that more conservative bosses overlooked. She understood that the modern mafia couldn't survive on extortion and traditional rackets alone. It needed to evolve, to diversify, to build revenue streams that could withstand law enforcement pressure and adapt to changing economic realities. When Salvatore was convicted of multiple crimes, including the brutal 1987 murder of Libero Grassi, a businessman who had publicly opposed mafia extortion practices, Maria Angela's moment arrived. With her husband imprisoned and unable to directly manage operations, she assumed active control with a mandate she gave herself: expand or perish. She refused to simply maintain existing territories while Salvatore served his sentence. Instead, she launched an aggressive campaign of growth that shocked even veteran mafia members accustomed to ambitious leadership. Under Maria Angela's command, the family's criminal enterprises exploded in scope and sophistication. She oversaw extensive extortion networks that reached beyond traditional Sicilian territories into new regions, forcing businesses from construction to agriculture to pay tribute for the privilege of operating without interference. But extortion was merely the foundation. She expanded aggressively into money laundering operations that moved millions through legitimate businesses, creating complex financial structures that disguised criminal proceeds as lawful commerce. She built drug trafficking networks that connected Sicilian suppliers with international markets, understanding that narcotics represented the future of mafia wealth even as traditionalists resisted the moral compromise of dealing in drugs. What distinguished Maria Angela from other ambitious bosses was her willingness to think beyond Sicily's borders. She forged alliances with mainland Italian crime families, establishing cooperative agreements that allowed for resource sharing and mutual protection. She invested criminal proceeds into legitimate businesses, hotels, restaurants, construction companies, creating both additional revenue streams and the kind of social legitimacy that made law enforcement investigations more complicated. She understood instinctively what many mafia leaders failed to grasp: the most successful criminal empire looks legitimate from the outside, while remaining ruthless at its core. Her competence and ruthlessness became legendary throughout Cosa Nostra. She managed significant aspects of family operations with a level of skill that earned grudging respect from male bosses who had initially dismissed her as merely a stand-in for her imprisoned husband. She demonstrated that women could not only maintain criminal enterprises, but expand them, that gender was irrelevant when measured against strategic vision and the willingness to do whatever success required. But empires built on crime inevitably attract attention. In 2008, authorities arrested Maria Angela during a large-scale operation targeting Cosa Nostra. She faced charges of extortion, mafia association, and involvement in a criminal organization that had grown far beyond anything her father or husband had controlled. Even while incarcerated, she continued influencing mafia activities, proving that the empire she had built possessed the resilience to survive even her physical absence. Maria Angela di Trapani had transformed inheritance into dynasty, proving that the most dangerous boss might be the one who refuses to accept limitations and sees territory not as something to defend, but as something to perpetually conquer. The mastermind. Anna De Luca Bassa understood what most ambitious criminals failed to grasp. Spectacular acts of violence might generate fear and headlines, but vast criminal empires rise or fall on the unglamorous foundation of confident daily management. Payrolls that must be met, shipments that must arrive on schedule, disputes that must be resolved before they escalate into war, alliances that must be maintained through constant communication and strategic favors. Born into the De Luca Bassa family, A clan with deep roots in the Camorra, she grew up surrounded by the machinery of organized crime, observing how chaos and incompetence destroyed more criminal organizations than law enforcement ever could. The De Luca Bassa clan was known throughout Naples for its violent and ruthless operations, engaging in drug trafficking, extortion, and the kind of brutal enforcement that kept territories under control and rivals intimidated. But violence without organization is merely chaos with a body count. The clan's true strength came not from its capacity for brutality, but from its systematic approach to criminal enterprise, its ability to maintain operations even when key figures were imprisoned or killed, its resilience in the face of both internal and external threats. When Anna's brother Antonio De Luca Bassa, a key figure in the Camorra, was imprisoned along with many other male leaders, the clan faced the crisis that destroyed lesser organizations. A sudden vacuum in day-to-day management that could fragment operations, break alliances, and leave territory vulnerable to aggressive takeover by rival families. Anna stepped into this void with the organizational genius that had been honed through years of observing, learning, and preparing for exactly this moment. Her approach was methodical, almost bureaucratic in its precision. While other bosses focused on dramatic displays of power, Anna focused on the operational details that kept money flowing and operations running smoothly. She managed the clan's extensive drug trafficking networks with the efficiency of a logistics corporation, ensuring that cocaine and heroin moved from suppliers to distributors to street-level dealers with minimal disruption and maximum profit. She oversaw extortion operations across Naples with careful attention to sustainable extraction, taking enough to demonstrate power, but not so much that businesses collapsed and eliminated future revenue streams. But Anna's true genius lay in her ability to forge and maintain alliances with other Camorra clans, recognizing that cooperation could be more profitable than competition. She negotiated territory divisions, brokered truces between feuding families, and created frameworks for dispute resolution that prevented minor disagreements from escalating into full-scale wars that would attract law enforcement attention and disrupt everyone's operations. Her diplomatic skills were legendary. She could sit at a table with rival bosses who had been killing each other's soldiers and emerge with agreements that satisfied competing interests. She maintained detailed oversight of financial operations, understanding that criminal proceeds must be laundered through legitimate businesses, that profits must be distributed in ways that maintained loyalty, that cash flows must be tracked to prevent theft by subordinates. She knew which politicians could be bribed, which law enforcement officials could be compromised, which judges might be influenced through pressure or payment. She built information networks that kept her informed of threats before they materialized, of opportunities before competitors recognized them, of law enforcement operations before raids occurred. Anna De Luca Bassa's criminal activities eventually drew inevitable attention from authorities. In 2008, she was arrested as part of a large-scale crackdown on the Camorra, facing charges related to drug trafficking, extortion, and her extensive role in managing the organization. Her arrest was a significant blow to the De Luca Bassa clan, yet the systems she had established, the procedures she had implemented, and the organizational structure she had built proved resilient enough to continue functioning even without her direct management. She had proven that in the complex machinery of modern organized crime, the tactical genius who manages daily operations with precision and foresight might be more valuable than the charismatic boss who generates fear. That sustainable criminal empires are built not on spectacular violence, but on competent administration, and that the most dangerous criminal might be the one who treats illegality with the systematic efficiency of legitimate business. The Ghost. In the sun-bleached hills of western Sicily, where ancient stone buildings guard secrets and loyalty runs deeper than blood, Patricia Messina Denaro lived a life of deliberate obscurity that would prove more valuable to the Cosa Nostra than any amount of violence or wealth. She was born into the infamous Messina Denaro family of Castelvetrano, a clan whose name carried weight throughout the Sicilian Mafia. But her true significance came not from her own criminal ambitions, but from her unwavering dedication to protecting the most wanted man in Italy, her brother Matteo Messina Denaro, known as Diabolic. Who would elude capture for an unprecedented 30 years while remaining one of the Cosa Nostra's most powerful and ruthless bosses? When Matteo became a fugitive in 1993, disappearing into the shadows to avoid arrest for murders, bombings, and countless other crimes that had made him Italy's most wanted criminal, Patricia made a choice that would define the rest of her life. She became his lifeline to the outside world, his spokesperson, his proxy, his connection to the organization he commanded from hiding. This wasn't the glamorous power of a clan boss or the strategic brilliance of an empire builder. It was the grinding, dangerous work of maintaining invisibility while facilitating the operations of a ghost. Patricia's role required extraordinary discipline and sacrifice. She couldn't draw attention, couldn't build her own criminal empire, couldn't enjoy the wealth or status that other mafia women commanded. Every action had to be calculated to protect her brother's location and ensure his survival. She managed communications between Matteo and his subordinates, relaying orders and receiving reports, while maintaining operational security that kept law enforcement perpetually frustrated. She coordinated financial transactions that kept her brother funded during his decades underground. She maintained family connections and clan relationships that might have fractured without her constant diplomatic efforts. For 20 years, Patricia served as Matteo's right hand, operating with such careful discretion that authorities struggled to build a case against her despite knowing she was instrumental in her brother's survival. But in December 2013, law enforcement finally closed in, arresting Patricia and charging her with active participation in the mafia organization. She was sentenced to 14 years in prison, a harsh penalty that reflected both her extensive involvement and the authorities' frustration at her role in enabling one of Italy's most elusive criminals. Yet even Patricia's arrest didn't end the Messina Denaro family support network. Her sister Rosalia immediately assumed the role Patricia had vacated, continuing to act as Matteo's proxy and maintaining his connections to the outside world. Rosalia managed the family's affairs with the same dedication and discretion her sister had demonstrated, proving that the Messina Denaro women understood something fundamental about power. That sometimes the greatest influence comes not from commanding empires, but from enabling those who do. That loyalty and sacrifice can be just as valuable as ruthlessness and ambition. Rosalia, too, would eventually face arrest for her alleged involvement in managing mafia operations, and when Matteo Messina Denaro was finally captured in January 2023 after 3 decades as a fugitive, it marked the end of an era. He died in prison on September 25, 2023, leaving behind his sisters serving harsh sentences for their unwavering dedication to protecting him. Patricia and Rosalia Messina Denaro represented a different kind of mafia queen, not the boss, not the strategist, not the beautiful killer or the widow seeking revenge, but the faithful sister who sacrificed everything for family loyalty. They proved that in the complex hierarchy of organized crime, power takes many forms, that influence doesn't always require a throne, and that sometimes the most dangerous woman in the mafia is the one who asks for nothing except the opportunity to protect those she loves, regardless of the cost to herself. Their story stands as testament to the fundamental truth that has sustained the mafia for generations. Family isn't just important, it's everything, even when everything means spending decades in prison for the crime of loyalty carried to its ultimate, unbreakable extreme. The Last Godmother. Erminia Giuliano, known throughout Naples as Celeste for her piercing light blue eyes that seem to see through deception and calculate odds before rivals finish speaking, represented the culmination of everything previous generations of Mafia Queens had learned through trial, error, blood, and imprisonment. Born into the notorious Giuliano family in Naples' Forcella district, she inherited not just a criminal empire, but the collective wisdom of decades, the strategic brilliance of alliance builders, the operational precision of tactical managers, the patient invisibility of shadow operators, and the ruthless decisiveness of those who understood that power demands constant vigilance and zero hesitation. The Giuliano clan had deep roots in the Camorra, controlling lucrative territories through involvement in drug trafficking, extortion, and racketeering that generated millions in annual revenue. But what distinguished Erminia from earlier godmothers was her ability to synthesize every lesson their experiences had taught. Spectacular violence attracted attention, so she wielded force strategically rather than impulsively. Total visibility made you a target, but complete invisibility prevented you from commanding respect, so she maintained carefully calibrated public presence, visible enough to command authority, discreet enough to evade intensive scrutiny. Loyalty had to be earned through both fear and reward, so she balanced ruthless punishment for betrayal with generous compensation for service. As male members of the Giuliano clan were systematically arrested and imprisoned throughout the 1990s, creating leadership vacuums that could have shattered the organization, Erminia stepped into an increasingly prominent role with the confidence of someone who had been preparing for this moment her entire life. She didn't merely maintain existing operations, she adapted them to changing realities, recognizing that modern law enforcement required modern evasion techniques, that digital surveillance demanded analog communication methods, that high-profile violence invited crackdowns while strategic discretion allowed continued operations. Under Erminia's leadership, the Giuliano clan continued to thrive and expand its influence throughout Naples despite intensifying law enforcement pressure. She oversaw extensive drug trafficking networks with the efficiency of a logistics corporation, coordinating cocaine and heroin distribution across multiple territories while maintaining strict operational security. She handled complex financial transactions that moved criminal proceeds through legitimate businesses, understanding that sustainable wealth required careful laundering and strategic investment. She maintained crucial alliances with other Camorra families through diplomatic skill and strategic marriages that bound clans together through blood ties that transcended temporary disputes. But Erminia's greatest skill was evasion. She had studied how previous godmothers were captured through informants, electronic surveillance, financial trails, patterns in their movements, and communications. She implemented countermeasures for every vulnerability, changing locations frequently, limiting her inner circle to blood relatives whose loyalty was assured, avoiding electronic communications that could be intercepted, maintaining multiple layers of insulation between herself and actual criminal operations. Where other bosses craved recognition and status, Erminia understood that anonymity was armor and patience was power. Her organizational skills and intelligence became legendary within the Camorra. She commanded respect not through dramatic displays, but through consistent competence, not through fear alone, but through the proven ability to reward loyalty and punish betrayal with equal efficiency. She made the Giuliano clan crucial to broader Camorra operations, ensuring that other families had vested interests in her survival and success. Yet, even the most careful operator cannot evade capture indefinitely. In 2000, Italian law enforcement finally closed in during a major crackdown on the Camorra, deploying resources specifically targeted at dismantling the Giuliano clan. Erminia Giuliano was arrested and faced charges related to drug trafficking, conspiracy, and her extensive leadership role in one of Naples' most powerful criminal organizations. Her capture made international headlines not just because another mafia boss had fallen, but because she represented something law enforcement had struggled to acknowledge: that women could command major criminal enterprises with the same ruthlessness and competence as any male boss, that gender was irrelevant compared to strategic intelligence and operational skill. Erminia Giuliano, Celeste with the piercing blue eyes, had evaded capture longer than most of her male counterparts by learning from every mistake previous generations made, by synthesizing every successful tactic earlier godmothers employed, and by understanding that in the modern era of organized crime, survival belongs not to the boldest or the most violent, but to the most intelligent, the most adaptable, and the most patient, proving that the last godmother standing might be the one who mastered the ultimate lesson. Power whispers, and the greatest queen is the one whose reign ends not with spectacular downfall, but with dignified capture after years of untouchable dominance.